Hi, my name is Dr. Brad Roderick, and I'll be the professor for this class, the Introduction to Missions. I'm glad that you're with us. I hope that you've already looked around a little bit on the website. If this is your first class, or if you're taking several classes this way, you'll notice that all of the work is listed by week. Every week there will be a forum where you can post. You'll be responding to the material that we're covering, and then there will be 3 separate days of material for you to study. This is not an independent study class. It is an online class. That means you should be following along at the same speed, interacting with other students in the posts that they put in the forum or questions that I'm asking, that it's actually a discussion. As a matter of fact, if you happen to be in the Memphis area and you're taking this class online, but occasionally you are free during class hours, if you ever want to stop by and see the live class, we'll be having it at the same time, so come on in and join us. We'd be glad to have you to be a part of that and to meet other students who are studying the same material as you at the same time. What I want to do in this video is just briefly introduce myself and introduce the subject and the class that we'll be having, so that you'll have a little bit of background on me and the material. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. In the syllabus, you'll find information on how to connect with me. You can make an appointment to either come by if you're here in town, or to connect by phone or by Skype. I look forward to working with you as we go together through this class. So first, just a little bit about myself. I was raised in a non-Christian family. Didn't have any church background, church experience. My father was an atheist, and he didn't talk about that a lot. It wasn't something that we discussed. It just was a void in our life. Sundays was for going to the lake and water skiing. Didn't have anything to do with church. When I was 17, my parents divorced and moved out, and that left me with a lot of questions. And through exploring what it meant to be a follower of Christ, through information friends had given me and being invited to church, I ended up becoming a follower of Christ, and sensed that God was calling me into missions sometime in person. Maybe I'll share the rest of that story. I'd love to hear your story of how you came to be a follower of Christ. But I found myself, after I graduated from college and seminary, preparing to be a missionary, but I didn't know what that meant. The only thing I knew that you could do that was ministry was to either be a youth leader or a pastor. So I thought, well, maybe I'd go work with youth overseas. That's what it meant to be a missionary. But one day while I was in school, I came out of class and I saw there was a bulletin board notice that said, plant a church this summer. And I thought, you plant churches? I thought churches just always existed. And so I got involved in a Praxis program, which was practical church planting experience for the summer. And I knew that was what God wanted me to do with my life, was to plant churches and help other people plant churches. So went to Orlando and planted a church in the Orlando area, came back, finished seminary. When I graduated, I moved to Massachusetts as a church planter, planted a church there, and while I was there, I met my wife, who also had been called into missions. We then went back to New Orleans Seminary, where I got my doctoral degree, worked in a mission church setting there in Louisiana, and then went back up to Massachusetts and worked for a while with the Massachusetts Baptist Association as a church planting coordinator. Then we were working with the the Baptist State Convention of Pennsylvania and South Jersey as church planter coordinators for the state convention, New Church Extension. During that time, we had 2 children, Joshua and Caleb. And then we were appointed to serve with the International Mission Board in South Asia, where we went to work as church planters among a Muslim people group. Over time, we started in the city of Hyderabad, then we moved to Bangalore, and then we moved to Ahmedabad. And during that time, we started working with the Muslims who lived in 1 city, and then in 3 states, and then the Muslims that were in India, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. Following that, we were transferred to Indonesia, where we had opportunity to serve for 6 years. Again, we were working on 1 small island and then in a state, and then we ended up working to coordinate the work of the International Mission Board among Muslim peoples in all of Southeast Asia. That was a wonderful experience, but after 6 years, the Lord led us back to South Asia, and we spent our last 7 years on the field living in New Delhi, but working throughout South Asia, making sure that anyone anywhere in the world who wanted to share the gospel with a South Asian, wanted to pray for South Asians, make disciples of South Asians, or plant a church among South Asians, had the resources that they needed to be able to do the work that God had called them to do. After we had been over 19 years with the International Mission Board, there was a call for 1,000 people to leave the field and return to the United States. We accepted that call. Gretchen and I felt like God was leading us to come back to the States at that time and continue the same work, which was basically helping followers of Jesus know how to pray, share the gospel, make disciples, teach leaders, and start churches. So that's what we're doing here, and that's what we're doing here at the Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary. Our oldest son, Joshua, is married to Lexi, and they have two beautiful children, Jude and Sophia. Our youngest son, Caleb, has just graduated from college and is teaching English in high school in Florida. So that's a little bit about us. After you finish watching this video, you'll have opportunity to go online and share a little bit about yourself so that the rest of the class will know a little bit more about who they're studying with and where your background is as you share answers and questions as we go forward. So let's talk a little bit about the purpose of the course. The course is called Introduction to Missions, so we're going to be studying missiology. This is the textbook. Every week you will have an assignment of a few chapters that will parallel what we're talking about in class. My philosophy of textbooks is, you're in college, you're in seminary, you know how to read. So I am not going to necessarily talk about what the book says and lead you page by page through the material in the book. I'm going to assume that you are familiar with that, and I'm going to build on that. We may make reference to it, but you will be responsible for understanding what's in the textbook, and there will be questions on the exams related to the textbook material. So be sure you keep up with the reading. Then you also have the assignments there. You will be doing a book report. There is a book review sheet that is in the syllabus that tells you what is expected of the book review. So make sure that you follow along with that and that you make yourself familiar with it. We'll also be having a research paper, and the information on how to do that is in the syllabus. Again, if you have any questions, make sure you contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you about what you're responsible for and how that can be done. Now, to go back to our textbook, the title of our textbook is Missiology, and missiology simply means the study of missions. That's what we're going to be talking about. Basically how Southern Baptists do missions, but we'll be looking at the entire history of missions, the biblical basis of missions. We'll be talking about ways that your local church can be involved in missions and what it might mean if God is calling you to missions, how you can be involved. Before we get any further, I want to talk about 3 misconceptions people often have about missions. The first one is that a missionary is an extraordinary person. A lot of people look at missionaries and put them up on a pedestal, think that they're extra spiritual or they have a different kind of spiritual power than other believers. But God's call is not for extraordinary people. Admitting our humanity gives us credibility. Missionaries are simply ordinary people who believe in, serve, and are transformed by an extraordinary God. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27, Paul tells us that God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things that are strong. Missionaries are often foolish, often weak. I know that I have been on many occasions. And so when you meet a missionary, don't assume that they're a spiritual giant. Assume that they are serving an amazing God. A second common misconception people have about missions is that world missions can best be done by proxy. What do I mean by that? Well, it is important to support missions, but that doesn't exempt us from our responsibility to be missionaries where we are. Also, career missionaries are essential. They establish a beachhead. Volunteer and short-term efforts would not succeed without long-term missionaries. We on the field often would talk about the 3-legged stool, the national partner, the missionary, and the partnering church, each working together, bringing unique gifts, but having unique needs. Sometimes it has been said by national believers that they don't really need the missionary. They can do the work better than the missionary. Just give them the money. There was a whole organization started by K.P. Yohanan that had that philosophy. But what would happen in many cases like that is they would collect a lot of money, build mansions, buy helicopters, and there was no accountability. We can't just give money to nationals and assume that everything is going to be okay. But the missionary can't go across the globe and do the work without partnering with nationals. They need each other. And for the missionary and the national to have the resources necessary, the sending churches also need to be involved. So that's what we mean when we say a 3-legged stool. All 3 parts are essential. The third misconception is once we find the right strategy, it can be used anywhere. This is a great danger, also known as methodolatry. The idea that we worship a way of doing things. This is what worked in our community, so this is what we're going to do in the next community or the next state or the next country, and it'll always work because it worked one time. Actually, mission strategists need to remember that all missions will be influenced by geography, history, and culture. Let's look a little bit at that sentence word by word. We're going to be influenced by geography, history, and culture. Influenced, not controlled by. So we need to be aware of what's happening, but we don't need to let that dictate what we do. Influenced by geography. Early Protestant mission efforts were limited to coastal areas of places where Western nations had colonies. So you can see how geography, the people couldn't get into the inland communities, so the geography limited where the gospel was. We see that in practical ways, like even here in Memphis. If you consider the Interstate Loop 240 or the 240 window, the work inside of that loop is going to look very different from the work outside, because the people who live inside the circle have a different culture and different experiences than those who live outside of that circle. So it's influenced by geography. It's also influenced by history. The Russians conquered the stans, the countries in Central Asia, and dominated them for centuries. When they received their freedom from the Russians and from the Russian Orthodox, how do you think that influenced the way that they would receive the gospel? How do you think that influenced the way they looked and understood and resented Christianity? The history of those countries influenced the way the gospel would be presented. And then third, culture. If you've already had the world religions class, you know that the goal of Buddhism is to escape the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. What influence might that cultural understanding have on an evangelism approach that begins with, "Are you born again?" Or, "Would you like to have eternal life?" Well, for a Buddhist, yes, of course they've been born again and again and again, and they don't want eternal life. They want to escape from that. So that influences, their culture influences the way that the gospel is presented, the way that missions is carried out. So that's just an idea, a few ideas of things that we want to knock off the table, we want to not have in our mind. We want to understand that missionaries are ordinary people. We want to understand that we need to be personally involved in missions, even if we never go overseas. And we need to understand that in every situation, we need to follow God's leadership for the specific strategy that will be appropriate for that location. Tomorrow, we're going to start looking at some definitions, some common understandings we need to have if we're going to continue talking about missions. I look forward to talking with you tomorrow. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thanks and God bless.